After all this, you still...
I still want that gas, yes. And you had better deliver.
All right, listeners. Welcome back to the Greenhouse. Figure we were long overdue for a fun one. Figure we were long overdue for a Gundam episode, as always. If Greenhouse Gaslighting is about anything, it's about Gundam. So joining me and Josh in the Greenhouse today, our good friend, you know them, you love them, Kennedy. Welcome back to the Greenhouse, and also welcome back to Twitter.
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me back to the show. Fuck you for welcoming me back to Twitter.
Well, you know, it's the place to be. I mean, if you are looking for any form of anti-Semitism, I couldn't imagine a better platform to be on.
You can find any flavor of anti-Semitism you want, really.
I mean, just straight up, including straight up, you know, just final solution stuff.
Yeah,
as promoted by the owner of the site.
Love that so much. Love to see the same conspiracies that motivated the Tree of Life synagogue shooter, a synagogue where one of my family members attends and happened to be running late that day. Love to see that conspiracy theory perpetuated by one of the richest men on the planet. Just love that so much. Okay, let's move on.
I can edit that out if you need me to, but
no. You can leave that the fuck in. People need to know that shit ain't right. All right, I am an angry Jew.
Yeah, we're on a lighthearted edition of the Greenhouse tonight, folks.
I will say I don't know if Elon Musk's anti-Semitism is because he's South African or because he's Canadian. That part remains up for debate.
Actually, you know, I'm allowed to get into some scaring the hose content, right?
Absolutely.
You know, quite a number of the people that worked hardest to bring down apartheid, other than obviously Black South Africans, were Jewish South Africans.
Right.
The anti-apartheid movement was widely considered to be a Jewish conspiracy in its own time. So, you know, some things never change.
Absolutely.
Some things never do.
Yeah.
War, strife, racism.
Twitter fucking sucks. War, strife, racism. You know what? You know what else has war, strife, and racism in it?
Gundam.
Yeah, Gundam's full of it.
You know,
you really pick your flavor.
We might live in the timeline where Henry Kissinger finally died. But the universal century of Gundam is a timeline where 1,000 Henry Kissingers are run amok. Wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah.
It's
bad.
Yeah, so I guess to maybe bring us back on track, to continue our I guess our last one was Witch from Mercury, so probably continuing where we left off from Char's counterattack last year, right? Both of you were right that I could have just jumped straight into today's topic, which is Gundam Unicorn. I did decide to pony up and watch. Yeah, do it the long way. Pony up and watch all like the miniseries, watch Zeta, and then watch Double Zeta, and then get to a rewatch of Char's counterattack, and then Unicorn. And holy fuck, this hit different. This hit so different. And I think both of you mentioned that this is like your favorite Gundam series, and that rank is very well deserved.
Yeah, it's easily among the best. It's pretty much my favorite. Witch from Mercury did cause stirrings in my heart that I still have to give more time and consideration to, perhaps.
But for the time being, Unicorn's still your top series?
I think so, yeah.
Josh, what about you? Unicorn still stand on top, or?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, you know, there's like maybe like roughly a handful or so of series that I kind of like, they'll shuffle around for like the top spot. Like you ask me on a different day, I might tell you, I'll give you a different answer, but Unicorn's always in the mix.
It's at least in the top 5.
Yeah, 100%.
That's solid. And then are both of you still like engaging Gundam at any current level right to watch other stuff? I've been trying to catch up on F91, but it is not starting for whatever reason.
It's just an hour-long movie, Adi. Come on.
I know, I procrastinate.
I just watched the Gino Reconquista compilation movies. I had only seen the first 3, and like the second 2 hadn't come out here yet, and they finally put them up on Gundam Info, so I watched those. So that's my most recent engagement with Gundam.
I've honestly been kind of watching other stuff lately. Myself, just been, I don't know, just been exploring some other things. I've been getting back into Fooly Cooly because they made all these Fooly Cooly spin-offs, and I haven't seen any of them. And so I was like, well, I'm going to rewatch the original series, but because I don't have a lot of time to watch stuff, even though the original series is very short, I'm still like 1 episode away from finishing that at the moment. And I also got into Our Flag Means Death.
Is that the Netflix pirate series?
It's Max.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I had
on Matt.
I've been seeing stuff for it, but I haven't watched it yet.
Okay. Quick derailment. Our Flag Means Death. Fucking awesome. Something we should potentially talk about on this show. It's really gay. It's really cute. The thing that you have to understand about it up front is that it is a romantic comedy with a lot of pirate flavor. It's not a pirate show in the sense of other things that you may have watched.
So would you describe it as a romantic show with pirate flavor or a pirate show with romantic flavor?
No, it's very much a romantic show with pirate flavor.
All right.
It's strongly, I mean, it is not lacking in pirate. It is steeped in pirate flavor, mon ami. The gumbo, it is perfect, but it's just very much like that is the trappings of this story that like are like a wonderful setting for it, but it is about many queer relationships. That is what this show is about.
I'm looking at this premise. This is looking crazy. Like, what if Stede Bonnet and Blackbeard were gay? And I'm like, okay, I can get with this. And I see Taika Waititi on it. I already know what to expect. Okay,
Right.
I can see where this is going. Thank you for the recommendation. I will check this out.
Yeah, especially because I feel like I heard things about it and I wasn't sure about it before I watched it, but now that I've seen it, I'm like, oh, I gotta evangelize about this show. So if you've been on the fence, get off that fence, watch Our Flag Means Death. It's so great.
Just jump in. Jump in.
And the only thing I could say about it as a negative, and if we podcast about it, we'll get more into that, is that it starts off kind of slow, like it undersells what the show is really about. And it's like you get like a few episodes in, and then you're like, "Oh, this shit's getting really gay. Okay, this is fun." But it's like at first you're like, "Where is this show going? I don't know." So, and that's the only thing I can say about it. That is a little bit of a. You have to just be okay with a little bit of a meandering start.
I sat through Zeta. I sat through Double Zeta. I can do this.
It's not worse than that.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's probably the most meandering start of any Gundam show.
Yeah. Other than that, I'm trying to think. Gundam Evo, which is like the Gundam Overwatch clone, that ended service like yesterday, right?
Did it?
I think so. Yeah, I didn't really play it that much, but I know you did.
I played it a lot. I thought it was pretty sick, but like I think people always just thought they would have time to play it. But for whatever reason, I think Bandai Namco decided to jump the gun on Battle Operation and the weird metaverse project they had that got leaked.
Yeah.
And they just put the kibosh on this thing, but I don't know. I'm hearing that people on Reddit want to bring it back for private server games, so we'll see what comes of it.
You know, maybe someday we should do a whole episode about how Gundam video games is a world of disappointment.
Just
Oh,
so
yeah,
much
that's-
potential.
yeah,
so
that's-
much potential.
Yeah, that's just been the thing I've been thinking about for a while. I mean, you've got that stupid metaverse thing, which is like clearly an unmitigated disaster, tremendous waste of resources, and then like they just keep like funding like a million mobile games, and like the last like good way, it's been years.
It's just brutal. If you're a Gundam fan looking for video games, try BattleTech maybe.
Armored
Is there
Core,
anything
maybe,
good for that lately?
I mean, just the same one from 7 years ago or whatever.
Oh, there you go.
Ah.
Yes.
Actually, one of the most Gundam feeling fun mech games that I played this year, although it's really unforgiving in a lot of ways, is
Armored Core?
Phantom Brigade.
Oh,
Armored Core also very cool. Don't want to downplay that, but shouts out to Phantom Brigade. It's like a turn-based strategy thing, kind of. It takes place on this like it's almost like like you're editing film on a timeline in a weird way, like how you set up
Okay.
actions.
I don't know how you haven't seen this before.
Also, kind of like
And,
XCOM, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little XCOM-ish, and what's great about it is that when the actions are playing out after you set them up, it feels really fast and fluid in a way that feels kind of Gundam-ish.
Okay.
Okay, we're gonna have to check
So
that out.
that's my Gundam game 2023.
Alrighty.
Oh yeah. Well, I guess tying us back to Gundam Unicorn. So, I guess what were your initial gut punch responses to it on the first watch, and if you had a rewatch at all, did your thoughts on it change?
That's pretty loaded. I honestly don't know. I mean, like it was like when I watched it, it was like as it was coming out, right? Like I think there
Okay.
might have been, I want to say like the first 2 episodes were probably out at that point.
And this was the OVA format, not the TV
Yes,
recut, right?
correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, this was the OVA format, and I think the first 2 episodes had been out at that point. So I had watched those, and then watched the rest as they came out. So I really can't tell you like exactly like what my gut reaction was when I first saw it, but like I mean I've rewatched it a number of times, so I mean clearly I did enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Kennedy, what about you?
Yeah, for me, I would say this was the series that kind of made me more of a serious Gundam fan. I had kind of a more casual relationship with Gundam for a long time, and then I started to get more into Gundam to some extent leading up to watching Unicorn. And I'd watched a few things, some UC stuff, some not. And then I watched Unicorn, and when I watched Unicorn, I just really felt like, oh yeah, I kind of want to watch all of Gundam now, like everything that's ever been made, just to see if anything else is even remotely this good.
Like introduction in that regards too, like it like especially like you have like the UC as a background, but it doesn't like you don't feel alienated for not having experienced it up to that point.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things about Unicorn is in a lot of ways it's very much for the fans, but then in some ways it's also actually kind of okay to introduce someone to Gundam too. Especially because it really starts off like setting everything up and like just kind of being like, in 30 seconds, here's a bunch of stuff that happened before kind of conversations. So I've actually, I think like in general, I think you're probably gonna have a better time if you've watched a bit of Gundam coming into this. But I also think like, I've shown it to a few people who had never seen Gundam before and became hooked because of the quality of Unicorn.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and like definitely animation wise, I think it's one of the more accessible entries in the UC, like where like, the original has a certain dated look to it. I think a lot of the other ones like Char's Counterattack and as well, like they've held up well, but I do you look at it and you know that this is from like a time gone past.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an older style of animation. It's the older animation.
No, on the other
techniques.
hand, you see, I think one of the great things about Unicorn is just how incredibly amazing it looks.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because they dumped a ton of money into it. And so the quality of the animation beats most modern anime made today, because most modern anime just isn't getting that funding. And just I mean, even in that era, also most anime, it's not like it's just like a modern thing. But I'm just saying, like, in general, like, most anime is not getting the funding of Gundam Unicorn. And so you watch this and compare it to, like, even a lot of the, like, decent stuff coming out today, and Unicorn looks just unbelievably good.
Yeah, I mean, I think, some of it's the OVA format helps too. And like this was released over the course of, I mean, close to 4 years, almost 5. So like, there was a decent span of time between, like, there was 7 OVA episodes, and then obviously the TV show was just kind of broken up from that, with like 1 or 2 like scenes added, more or less.
Yeah. So definitely knocked my socks off on first watch, and I've rewatched it a couple of times, and it's still good. Still really, really good, really enjoyable.
I can definitely agree with it holds up on rewatch. I did talk to some people who had watched it, and this was like their first entry into UC, so no one had any real complaints about like the presentation or the style, but they found it hard to appreciate certain elements like Laplace's box and new types. So it does have a certain degree of buy-in. It's definitely not unforgiving for like a first entry into Gundam, but the reward, I think, pays out a lot more if you've been invested in it to some degree.
I mean, it's
Yeah, I
tough
think that's
because
fair.
it's like there almost is no right place to jump into the UC.
That is
We've
true.
discussed this before
That
a
is
little
true.
bit. And so, Unicorn in some ways is as good a place as any, and in some ways it's not. And it really depends on just the kind of person that you're trying to get into the show to some extent.
I think
Like,
that's fair.
if somebody was like, came to me and was like, just really gung ho about like, I want to understand Gundam lore and I don't care how nerdy it is, I'd be like, okay, we're watching the origin.
Right.
You know? But like, most people who like want to watch something fun, if you put on the origin, are like, what the fuck am I watching? This feels like a documentary.
Which I think is the beauty of Unicorn, right? Is that what it might not do in lore accessibility, and it's not really trying to. Gundam is not really about its lore, it's about its deep themes of like human potential. What does life in space look like? How do you stop conflict, all of that stuff, right? So what Unicorn does is it takes all of Tomino's old presentation and like moves it forward into the 21st century, both with like updated animation, but with like a new take on how it explores new types. And I think like maybe we got to jump into a discussion about the characters, right? So I think when I started watching this, Kennedy, you did like mention like it's okay if you hate Banneger, but I thought he was like the perfect protagonist in a way.
Well, I said it's okay if you hate him at the start, basically, because sometimes what I warn people, especially if they're like averse to certain kinds of tropes or certain kinds of characters or certain kinds of storytelling, is I'll kind of warn them that like you may hate a lot of the characters up front, and that's just part of the journey, basically. A lot of these characters behave in ways that are just like they lack maturity at first, or there's just this or that going on. But then it's a big part of what makes this cool is it's about a lot of them kind of growing up and growing out of these like more pathetic kinds of ways of being, or trapped, or this or that. Anyway.
Well, no, that's a recurring theme for like Tomino's Gundam protagonists and even like Gundam protagonists in other series, right? Is like this reluctant hero has to turn into like the person to meet the moment, right? And
He really
that was
isn't that reluctant though. At any
no,
point,
he's not. The way
he's reluctant about halfway through, but like he gets over that.
It's definitely different with the way he's presented to. The way I saw it, right, is that if you take new types for what they are, which is that they can understand people's and objects' history to a certain extent, the minute he looked at that Zaku in the museum that had the bullet through it, it had the same like fourth wall break realization, to me at least, of like, oh, it's a stand-in for the viewer who already knows all this stuff about the Universal Century. Banniger is a stand-in for the audience just as much as he is like someone who, as a new type, becomes the person to meet the moment. Maybe that's just me reading way too deep into it. I don't know.
No, I think there is an aspect of sort of servicing the audience with this series.
Like a meta commentary on UC
Yeah.
to some extent, to some limited extent.
Yeah, and I think, and Unicorn and kind of a lot of projects that relate to UC sort of have debatably a problem where they kind of focus like really heavily on like the 1 year war is like that's like the big part of like the Universal Century's history, and of course it is, but it doesn't necessarily acknowledge as much of the conflicts afterwards. Just a few scattered references and like some Mobile Suit cameos, primarily. But like because Banagher like was not alive for like the 1 year war, or was like incredibly young when it would have happened, right? It gives you that more ignorant audience surrogate type character.
Yeah. So I think we already covered a couple questions in the outline, I guess, right? But what do you make of like some of the other protagonists in this series too, right? Because you have Banniger, but you also have him playing off of like the only other dynamic I've seen like this. I think it doesn't come up in UC that often, but kind of like Athrun and Kira and Seed is where I saw this dynamic, right? Of like the reluctant soldier and then like the officer dynamic. Maybe you can say that's like Amuro and Bright's dynamic in like the original series, right? But Ridley and Banniger play a completely different style in this series. Then you also have Mineva, and then you got not only the crew of the Nail Argama, but also like the Garanciers, right? So it's an interesting setup as far as Gundam goes, where like there's protagonists on both sides of it, and Banniger has to kind of like bridge the gap between both factions to some extent.
But he is kind of like the bridge between them, right? Like it's
right.
There wouldn't be that connective tissue necessarily without his like acknowledgement of the humanity on both sides.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna get into. Is just like that is part of what makes Banagher's character kind of special in the context of this situation is that like he keeps refusing to sort of like just pick a side. Like people keep telling him you've got to like pick a side here, or and like these sort of decisive things, and he keeps refusing that, and sometimes it bites him in the ass even. But overall, like the sticking to his convictions is what allows him to be like the kind and level-headed person that he needs to be in the right moments, that make all the important things possible. And it is that new type magic.
That singular like sequence of like him fighting Marita Cruz, and he's about to like go for the kill shot, and then the new type resonance occurs, and he looks into like and sees her past, and then like we see like not all the subtle nods to the UC history, but also like the whole point of new types and how the storytelling of Gundam goes about, right? Which is that two people on opposite sides across space can understand each other, and that's the whole new type theory that undergirds um both like some of the spiritual things of Gundam, but also like the political conflict in Universal Century, right? That new types would be able to put an end to human conflict. So you kind of see the magic of new types in that scene, and then for it to end in that very powerful, no matter what, always hit people with even so. I saw that in a really dark week of my life. Like I was not doing well, and I saw that scene, and I was like, low key crying thug tears, but also like, yo, this hits. This is so fucking right. Like what the hell?
Yeah.
Well, and this show's like so much more optimistic than really almost any other
Yeah.
show when it comes to that new type magic, right? When it comes like when you like think about like the actual possibility of bridging like, you know, these connections and stuff like that. Compare that to, you know, the original series, right? Where the only real like, you know, example of that you had was like, you know, Amuro and Lala, and, you know, spoiler alerts, but Lala dies, and then, you know, you have him and Char who just hate each other till the end of time. And then, you know, Zeta Gundam, that really isn't like, I mean, no, everyone's pretty rigid there as well, except for Rekua, who I guess, you know, was just kind of thirsty for some manly attention that Char wasn't willing to put out, I guess. But you know, any Double Zeta is kind of the same deal too, right? Where there's, you know, even some people who are on a little bit more friendly terms, they don't really, you know, like, you don't get that sort of union at the end, right? And yes, like people do, you know, die in Unicorn and stuff like that, but you have like their goals sort of manifesting together, and you see like, you know, the factions sort of working together to achieve common objectives in a way that you really don't in any other Gundam that I can think of.
And that's the kind of thing where understanding what Tomino wanted from his work without Tomino being there to present it is a unique specter that haunts this work, right? Because the team behind Unicorn really understands the logic of how new types work, both as a storytelling device and for, you know, plot implications, as well as like meaningful expression of themes in the work, right? But then they also understand the political themes, but they're not burdened by Tomino the man, who, as we come to understand it, you know, was severely depressed when working on Gundam. One of his more spicier interviews later, and in that interview, he basically mentions like, yeah, I was way too depressed working on Gundam. I kind of always had this sense that I wanted to end the project prematurely, right? And that's kind of why Zeta ends on that dark note, and why Victory also ended on a dark note in his explanation, right? So to have a team that understands the vision but isn't burdened by the creator personally, right? Not that I think Tomino's inherently bad. You know, it opens the possibility. There it is again, the beast of possibility, right? It opens the possibility to expand the horizon of what Gundam can be.
Yeah.
And more broadly, yeah, it's like you can present optimism in a way that isn't cheap.
Yeah, it's a very cool thing in a lot of ways, and Benager is like he's the paragon of that optimism. And he really is just like the most, pretty much one of the most like truly non-naively, although he is naive at times, but overall non-naively optimistic protagonists in a Gundam series. Because a lot of times it's like if they are overly optimistic at the start, it's presented as, oh well, that was naive. Now reality has
You
come
fool.
to destroy you.
Soletta Mercury, that was literally Soletta Mercury's arc, yeah.
Yeah. But Benager, it's like actually your optimism is correct. Even though, yes, there are a lot of things that are not good and that go wrong. Your optimism is still the correct choice. It's the only choice that will help to create anything better from the circumstances. And I think that's pretty cool. I like a lot of the other characters too. Marita, obviously, pretty complex character that it's easy to get attached to, I think. I also uh I like I just you gotta love Bright Noah's interesting little part in this, I think.
Yeah.
If you've
Yeah.
seen a lot of other Gundam.
Well, and it's interesting too, because obviously spoilers for the novel. He's in the Hathaway novel too, and that was sort of his like end of continuity appearance. But like this was kind of the first time that we saw him animated, at least like after he had already had his character arc, right? So you just have like this, he's there as sort of this wise sage mentor for like a hot second, and also kind of pulls a few little machinations to string the plot along a little as well too.
Yeah. I like
The
most
cameos
of the
weren't
characters,
wasted.
really. The cameos were not wasted. No, not
Yeah,
at all.
you had Kai Shiden, actually, I guess he was kind of cool in Zeta too, but is kind of known for like that meme, horrible translation of the Quattro is HR on the on the script. But that's in this he had a fun role. Bill Torchica was there too. Obviously, although she has less relevance maybe in this version of events than she would otherwise. I don't know. It depends on you gotta do your headcanon with a lot of UC Gundam, because there's so many alternate adaptations of so many things, right? Like, do you go off the
There's
the
3
novelization?
adaptations of Char's Counterattack. Literally 3 adaptations.
There's more than that, technically.
What?
But...
Oh god.
like there's 3 like named ones, like in the sense that they have like distinct names, but it's like you have the Beltorchika's Children novel, you have the manga adaptation of it, which is also different. You have High Streamer, you have the original movie. I'm pretty sure they did a manga adaptation of that as well. So there's a lot of choose your own adventure when it comes to a Char's Counterattack. A little bit of Unicorn too.
I had noticed that you had asked in the notes, is Benager like a conveniently scripted protagonist? And I do think that's an interesting thing to discuss at least a tiny bit, because I think, again, Benager at first kind of comes off as a little generic and a bit of a whiny idiot.
Bit of a simp.
And a total simp.
I put up with Kira Yamato. This is okay.
Yeah, that's true.
And at first you're kind of like, is this kind of like just feels a little bit generic and rough around the edges protagonist going anywhere? But this guy evolves more over the course of this story arc than a lot of Gundam protagonists do in longer series. This guy evolves a lot. And by the end, you don't feel at all, at least I didn't feel at all like it was like convenient scripting, or like he was just kind of like a filling in the blanks. I was like, I love this guy, let's fucking go.
Yeah, it all felt organic. Every like evolution of his character, right? And it's like he goes through a lot. I mean, just in like again, like you said, there's far longer series where, frankly, a lot less happens than this one. So I think it makes sense to sort of like seeing him in that lens and whatnot. And I think you're right. Like it feels like he's earned his his stripes and his changes as a character.
I 100% agree with the both of you, and I think like to really counter that, is he a conveniently scripted protagonist narrative? Look at who they have him pitted against. A literal Char clone, like the Char clone to end all Char clones. A literal Char clone, who is the embodiment of like nihilism to its own end.
Yep.
So it's beyond like convenience. I think it's like a real theme of like this spirit and embodiment of the possible and like something different, versus like a literal husk of what has been and what has always been. I mean, Full Frontal basically says that about himself in no
he's
terms.
he's extraordinarily nihilistic about everything. And just very
well, and hey, if you came back from the dead, I mean, maybe he would be too.
that's a fair point. But yeah, I think the hollowness of Full Frontal is both fascinating and at times kind of terrifying in a way that helps to also like how do you one up Char yet again? Well, they actually kind of did an okay job of it.
Yeah, and I think it has like this interesting commentary on like the nature of Char as well, right? Where it's like there's some debate over like to what extent is he just a clone or the actual Char, right? I mean his last scene sort of shows that like he does have some part of that soul within him, right? And he even like mentions lines about like I don't know why I'm compelled to do the things that I do. It's like I'm being strung along by some like divine or unnatural force or whatever. And I think like it's sort of like this is like a Char who's like failed in his objectives. This is he's as he notes, right, humanity's witnessed a miracle and refuses to change. So like this is sort of the natural embrace of like all of like the sources of those passions, the rivalry, all that stuff is gone. So this is just sort of what you're left with.
Yeah, basically wants to enact space neoliberalism.
Which I mean, hey, they already have a version of it in place.
Right.
It's just flipping the script.
I think there was a throwaway line in SD Gundam Battle Alliance, which is the game where they have all the different universes battle in like different events across different timelines. So there's an event where I think Char in the new Gundam can fight Full Frontal, and basically like Amuro makes this comment that like this is not the Char I knew. This is a complete hollow specter who's nothing like him. Fighting him is like they go into like this stupid thing, like fighting this guy is like an insult to Char, which is I guess a fun thing to put in the game. But I think that's 100% it. Where you build up Char as this like ideologically driven, hyper focused character who in no small terms is kind of like going this route because of the horrors that happen in Zeta, right? Like there's that cutscene in one game where it's literally him saying, because I saw the shit that happened to Camille, I need to blow up the earth.
Yeah, more or less.
And then for that character to then like, I don't know, there's this weird novelization too where I was reading, or at least the wiki says Full Frontal is a clone that was subjected to like the fried pen drive of Char's memory in the psycho frame.
Yeah, so the procedure that created him, which they don't talk about in the OVA,
it's light novel only, yeah.
Yeah, it's light novel only. Maybe it was in one of the manga adaptations. I'm not sure. As well, but it comes up again in narrative because Zoltan, the villain of that movie, or one of the villains, probably the one that's they actually fight, but not the architect, right? Like Monaghan, who's also the person who did this to Full Frontal as well.
Again. That movie's fucking great.
It is.
Yeah. So anyways, Zoltan and Frontal are like from the same cloning program. One was just not successful.
Okay, so I think we already hit up this point, which is have you watched all the UC before and is watching all of it? Yeah, we already discussed that. So I guess, yeah, regarding how space magic in this series went, particularly with the concept of psychoframe resonance, is the new type empathy tool for storytelling in Gundam a net cool or net weird storytelling device? How is the concept of new types advanced or clarified with this series?
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, I think it does provide a little bit more like clarification, I guess. I mean, especially like when you add narrative into the mix, which is like kind of like a, it's directly following up on this, but mostly with different characters. but I think it provides some explanation. I mean, some people might argue it's a little too, midichlorian esque. I personally don't mind it though. I mean, I think in general, like the new type stuff is like a net cool. Like I go in like expecting new type stuff and usually like what we get out of it. I mean, as long as it's not done in like a way that feels like too much of a cop out, which I don't think it really felt like that here, right? I mean, it felt like it was we sort of boil down these conflicts into these metaphysical like battle of wills, and I think that's the new type magic sort of facilitates that in a storytelling sense of a otherwise more grounded sci-fi setting.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
anything, it's hyper justified here. Like they really get into the idea of what is a new type. Is it just a good
Yeah.
pilot? Is it a sorcerer? What is it? And like they have these conversations and get into the philosophy of it in an interesting way that I think is really awesome, and that really helps to make Unicorn one of the best ones. Because I do think it can get a little muddy at times. But I think it's a cool concept. A lot of sci-fi series sort of have something in them that, even if it's a relatively hard sci-fi series, in other ways represents this sort of concept of the unknown, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is both unrealistic and frankly boring to imagine that once we start exploring space heavily, we'll never find anything that mystifies us, right?
Right.
And like something like new type powers might be a bit of a stretch of the imagination, perhaps, but
and the
perhaps
thing,
not, or perhaps, whatever. So I just think that it's like, this is a series that is overall very, very rooted in harsh reality. You
Yeah.
get shot, you're probably gonna die. This isn't like superhero rules.
right?
You're not
Definitely
Bruce Willis in an action movie, unless you're one of the main characters, and even then you're still more fragile than you'd probably like to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was gonna say too, like when you were like talking about like the idea of like exploring space and like the odds are something will mystify us, but like really, like I think the Gundam meta franchise, like beyond even like UC, I think in general, like it's really about like exploring humanity more than it is about space, right? I mean, like they never portray like I don't think there's any Gundam series that's particularly interested in like space travel and expedition as anything more than just like a set piece. Like, I mean, you get a little bit of like references, like I think
Iron-Blooded Orphans is the only one that I think kind of leans into the like, here's what it was like to colonize each of these places.
Yeah, because you do have like this whole like ancient war backdrop,
and like travel is actually like a big deal in that. Like travel is sort of like in Witch from Mercury, for example, travel is almost trivial. Like,
oh yeah, it just feels like we're going to Earth for the first time in a big whoop.
Yeah, it's like there's spaceships everywhere. Getting on one's not that big of a deal. Whatever. But Iron-Blooded Orphans, there's a large plot point of the first season is just how do we get from point A to point B. But that's like I think that's pretty much the only series that really embraces that, like, what sorts of technologies and social systems will be needed to colonize another planet successfully, and it's not just
and
like a backdrop.
There's a little bit in like the backdrop of like Cosmic Era too, but like that's it. Like it's just pure backdrop. It's never really about that. It's just kind of like, yeah, mankind's in space. Like Unicorn does, to be fair, acknowledge a little bit of like, yeah, like, this whole space colonization thing was basically like, penal colonies. And that, they have like, you do have the scene on is Palau?
It's Palau,
yeah. Where like you have like the little church, and like Marita's like, yeah, like, these people had nothing, so they try to, find solace in the light of God or whatever. And that was interesting because it is kind of different from the world building, but usually, like, I think Gundam, and even that, right, is sort of exploring the human condition. How does humanity cope with the unknown, rather than how do we just figure out how the logistics here of traveling in space and colonizing.
I will say also though, although we didn't get like tons of it, that I did enjoy the world building about the Von Braun facility on the moon.
Yeah, because like it's always something that's like been there, and it really isn't like talked about that much. Like they kind of, and even in this, right? Like even when you actually literally see like people who are in charge of Anaheim Electronics and like where they're stationed on the moon and whatnot, you don't really like find out like that much about how like how does this organization work? Just how do they control everything? And it's like here is like really the only explanation we get, which is like conspiracies.
Yeah, it's almost like they took a really um what's the author's name? Fuck. Like yeah. Uh they took like a real Peter Dale Scott approach to how states and societies carry out politics at a deep level, right? So you have this like real conspiracy with the Vist Foundation, Anaheim Electronics, and the Earth Federation acting in tandem to basically maintain this lie that new types were never really a thing, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like a very pilled way to consider how nation states would operate in what is ostensibly just a sci-fi series, you know?
Well, when it's not even, it's a little deeper than just the new type thing. It's really a conspiracy to, undermine like the rights of self-determination for anyone living in space.
Pretty
Yeah.
much.
The
Pretty much.
evidence for new types is just like, oh shit, like that was the entire pretext in that like, false promise we gave them. Man, if this ever got out, that would be really bad.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a really it's this is one of the most philosophically fascinating Gundam series, and that's not a light statement to make.
No.
And the new type shit here is just a great part of that. So I was all in for pretty much everything. I think if there's any flaw with Unicorn, it's just that the middle is the strongest and the beginning, like the bookends are a little bit just kind of softer by comparison. But that's a tiny complaint, you know.
The middle is kind of the more heavy hitting, like emotional side of it, and I think that's fair.
But even still, like even when it gets into the like ultimate space wizardry stuff at the end, that's a little bit more of a softer touch in some ways. It's still pretty fun, really beautiful, also, like unbelievably beautiful.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, I think you could also look at it as like it's a necessary denouement from like a really like big build up at the start and like a big payoff during the middle. Like the invasion of like the Earth Federation headquarters and the all the fucking like vintage Xeon suits coming out the water at Torrington Base. Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Some incredible fan service moments.
Well, it's cool too because like we've I mean obviously like Torrington was where the colony around the colony drop zone, but it was also we've seen it in Stardust and it's like it's the same base.
Yeah.
Like it looks the same and whatnot, so it's like interesting just seeing, and like you also kind of get the sense that like this is like such a low priority, like defending this position by the Federation, that they have all their old mobile suits here too.
Yeah, it's like where fan service and like thematic payoff really intersect, where you have like the old ghost of like the Federation versus Xeon playing out in this new conflict, and all the new characters have to like react to this, payoff in the immediate story, but also like it is a part of the old history we saw, whether it's like stuff like 8th MS team with jungle combat and stay behind Xeon soldiers, whether it's like similar concepts that are brought up in like Gundam Thunderbolt, although we don't know if that's canon, we get to see it play out in like a mainline story. So it's definitely pretty cool. I guess on that edge. Oh, go ahead.
I still just want to I really want to give credit to the writers that it's like this shit is great if you are already into Gundam, but it's also an okay entry point. And I just think I mean, it's actually there's so many worse entry points that you could go with.
Yeah.
That I think you just really have to admire how well they struck that balance. I know we've touched on this a little already, but I just think with some of the themes that we're talking about right now in particular.
Yeah, and I was gonna say too, with the Xeon stuff is when you understand more about the world, right? You understand that this isn't one movement that's converging to attack the Federation, right? It's they allude to it, right? Some of these were Char loyalists, some of them were Haman loyalists, and those people were not people who had the same ideology or anything like that. So it's interesting where you kind of get that understanding of the layman perspective that they're just kind of really just united by their hatred of the Federation. Which if you understand those differences or not, it's still I think that the core message there really comes across. Yes, you do get a greater appreciation for it if you know more, but you're not left in the dark if you don't.
I'm now remembering something Kennedy said in a previous Gundam episode we did, where it's what if there's a cave somewhere and it's some Xeon guys sitting out Char's counterattack, and it's a cave full of Zaku 3s, and they're just I'm not with Char on this one. I'll wait till the next one.
Yeah, I mean, here was
this is literally
opportunity.
This is literally it's those guys. Yeah.
Well, and there's I know for sure one of the games, I think it's Missing Link, the Ifrit Shanid that shows up. They gave a whole backstory to that pilot, and then there's some other side stories too, the Goof heavy arms that you see in the European castle. There's a side story where he never made it to the battlefield because you never see him again in that episode. You just see the appearance of his mobile suit, and then he never shows up. And he just got sidetracked by something else, and ends up surviving Torrington because he could never make it from wherever he was in Europe to Torrington.
Yo, when are we gonna talk about the suits?
Let's talk about that right now. Let's talk about that right now, because we answered this question. I had it's Glup Shido joke for UC heads, but I think we meaningfully addressed that.
Yeah.
Let's get into suits. Let's get into suits right now.
I'm a big fan of the suits in Unicorn. I think
it kind of peaks here, right?
Super peaks
especially
here.
for UC stuff. But also just somewhat in general. It's hard for me to think of another series with better suits other than Witch from Mercury, which is one of the reasons why Witch from Mercury, again, tugs at my heartstrings, and sometimes I might tell people that's my favorite.
Sure.
But
one series has Jagans in it.
But yeah, we get Jagans, which of course just incredible. The
got a collection of Jagans here.
Oh god, the Jagans are so good. So many good Jagans. Jagans are, of course, one of my absolute favorite mobile suits.
And you get their strongest showing, right? Which is the opening battle between the Stark Jagan and the Kshatriya.
Yeah! I mean, listen, a lot of Jagans just get blown up without doing much in this series.
And to be fair, he didn't really do that much either.
They're so cool. Also, that ECOWAS Jagan.
They literally made a CIA Jagan. They
made
literally made a CIA
Jagan. All right, listen. I know ACAB must include ECOWAS, but in Gundam UC universe, I guess I'm just a fascist. Okay, I don't know what to tell you.
What about the Jesta versus the Jagan? What do you think?
I prefer the Jagan, but I really like the Jesta. I think the Jesta is a really cool suit also.
The Jesta edges out a little bit for me, but fair enough.
What about you, Josh?
The Jagan has a little bit more of this The Jagan looks like a hot 60s car a tiny bit in just the right way or
It's
something.
it's like a 70s Impala. You know what I'm talking about? You know?
Yeah. Or it's
It's
got like I don't know. It's got some kind of magic going on with it. And then the Jesta still looks really cool, but he just a little bit more of like a chonky, greebly boy. And that's cool too. You know, no hate.
Yeah, I mean, there's like so many like awesome ones to go for. I mean, obviously the unicorn itself is sweet. Like all
so cool.
versions of it are
So
really
cool.
cool, right? The Banshee as well. I liked that was actually an OVA choice was changing the armaments of the Banshee, especially for that first fight between it and the unicorn. I liked that. Like it's just kind of a nice way to distinguish them, and it really like, especially like that claw, really adds a certain like primalness to it, which kind of fits with the fractured mental state of its pilot at that point.
Yeah. Also, really quick, shouts out to the Jesta cannon for being one of the better cannon Gundams of all time, or mobile suits, not Gundams. You know, I'm tired. I'm
It doesn't get to
talking
do a
like
whole
idiot.
lot, but yeah.
But yeah, I just feel like cannon suits in general, a lot of them are kind of weak, especially like everything in between, like the original cannon suits.
Yeah, like the gun cannon and
The original gun cannons, those were like iconic, you know?
Mhm.
And then there's like a long period where a lot of the cannon suits in the middle don't really do it for me. The Jesta cannon is like a good proper cannon suit that you like to look at again.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, and shout outs to, I mean, the Sinanju was sweet. The
Very
Neo
sweet.
Zeong as well. I mean, that I remember that's like one of the things where I really remember like my first reaction to that, because like the novel, it didn't exist. It was just the Sinanju versus the unicorn and the Banshee for the final fight, so it was kind of a little lopsided against him. But the Neo Zeong was added for the OVA, and I remember like when they first unveiled that and just like seeing how they like sort of like mastered like the mobile armor aesthetic, like all of like the cool bits on that one, and it just feels like such a threatening final boss too.
Oh yeah. So many of these just have really good shaping. Just like just you don't have that feeling of like that bit feels a little silly and out of proportion, or that bit seems a little bit tacked on, or I don't know, like just things that sometimes I feel when I look at some mobile suit designs where there's just a little bit too much or a little bit not enough of something, and it just feels not
I feel like
quite right.
And I feel like they really like perfected a lot of like the like designs that were like the inspiration for things, right? Like I see Adi looking at the Rizel.
The Rizel is definitely my favorite. It's definitely my favorite of the
Rizel,
line.
like it's like, when you look at its lore, it's like it's like
the Zeta, the Regi Z, the Methis, and
it's like, but it's built on the Methis frame, and like when you see how it transforms, it's like, oh yeah, that's exactly how the Methis transforms. Like, how'd you not see it before?
It's so fucking cool.
And then they even like brought back like the Anksha, which is like
it was the Ashamar.
Yeah, the Ashamar. So like they basically understood like what made like
the Federation has decided to openly embrace its fascist roots.
but basically like what they did with the designs of these new suits as well as like the classic ones, right? Is
they gave it a Jagan's face.
Well, they gave it a Jagan's face, which is perfect. That's all you need to do, right? But they understood what made all like the Zeta era designs and then the original UC designs as a whole really cool. And then you bring them into the 21st century, right? So you get these cool designs that are like clearly inspired and really like wearing on their sleeve that they're influenced by like these classic designs. But then also they let the old suits shine. So like the Jagans get a lot of love on the fights on Earth. You've got Gym 2s and Gym 3s. You got like the Bayer Lance, which was like a blink and you miss it suit from Zeta show up again.
That was that was piloted by the main rival in Zeta, so it wasn't exactly blink and you'll miss it.
That's true. So like, there's a lot of like references that pay out.
Well, and like the Ksatria compared to like the Queen Mansa, the Rosen Zulu to the Hama Hama, like you could see like the direct lineage, and they feel like kind of like,
oh god, the
reflecting
Gira Zulu
influences.
really is like a pretty sleek,
sleek
machine. Like a lot of the early Xeon suits, some of them just have proportions that are just like a little too goofy at times, and this one did a really good job of like the Gira Zulu is a great example of one that just like looks perfectly proportioned, but also still looks like a Xeon suit, not a Federation suit. It has that vibe. I liked that one. I liked a lot of those. A lot of the newer Xeon suits. Like, it's fun to see all the classic ones, but a lot of the like modern weapons that the Xeon remnants are running are also really fucking cool.
Yeah.
Or they're like repurposing ones from Double Zeta, which didn't get a lot of love, right? So like the Dryson was this like really goofy clone of the Dom that was in Double Zeta. And then they just made it look so intimidating in this one.
Yeah, like it's kind of one of those things where like as like kind of a just a general like hobbyist and collector, like you don't realize sometimes like how much like a recolor can really just like brighten like, or not in this case not literally brightening, but like really just spruce up a design, right? Like there's nothing changed here. I mean, the proportions are drawn a little differently, but like it's primarily just like he got rid of that weird purple and he just has like a nicer like tone.
Yeah. It's like if the Dom fucks.
Yeah.
Sort of circling back, but also somewhat saving the best for last. The Unicorn fucks so hard.
So hard.
Like, holy shit, this is one of the coolest fucking Gundams ever. And the minute that it streaks out there on the battlefield and people go out there and go, Gundam, you don't doubt that that's how they would feel. That they would be like, oh shit, that's it. That's the thing.
It is interesting. Like it does feel like, because that's like something that I was thinking about in general with Unicorn, was that there's like that mysticism that like this attempts to reapply to everything, where like, the term Gundam and Gundam pilot means something, where like you look at how many UC side stories there are, how many mangas there are, how many OVAs, where like, especially like 08 the Mess Team, where there's like a million fucking Gundams. It feels like, why does this mean anything? Right? Like, it's just like anyone can pilot a Gundam. But like here they really like make it feel special again.
Oh yeah. It feels very special, and again, like I just can't overstate that like when the Unicorn gets out there and people start freaking out, it just feels deserved. This thing looks like nothing else on the battlefield, and it's moving around in this way that's very dramatic, and when the lights get going, it's just so cool looking, and God, it's just such a good design.
Yeah, seeing the Unicorn transform, it's like it brings the magic of like very classic mech anime to the 21st century, because it's like seeing the Gundam launch for the first time, even in like that super old animation style. It comes up from the ground, the V-fin shines and the eyes start glowing, and there's that boing sound, like there's very few feelings like seeing a Gundam start up for a first time, and having it be this like nondescript white mobile suit transform into like the iconic Gundam, which had this like battlefield propaganda effect in Gundam, right? Where it's like the Xeon soldiers see this like dynamic white mobile suit and start freaking out when they see it. And knowing everything we know about the lore of this world, it's like fireworks going off. It's like someone snaps their finger and you fucking get it. That's the magic of this series. It's like
the Twin Towers got hit again.
Which we should we're gonna talk about that in a bit. We're gonna talk about that in a bit. We really are. I'm gonna bring that up.
Oh God, yeah, that.
But I think you're 100% spot on. Like the unicorn itself.
So the transformed version obviously is the winner here, in most ways. But I just want to also give proper credit to, like, just the basic version looks really good and interesting, and they managed to make it look exciting enough that, like, you're excited about that design when you see it untransformed. Just from, like, the first moments you see it, you're like, that looks pretty cool, because the proportions are excellent. Like, the shaping of all the different parts and panels just feels really good and right somehow. And there's just, and that horn, of course, that singular horn is really dramatic in its own right. And so there's just this, and the stark whiteness of it also adds to the drama. So there's just this sort of, it's like, it's not as showy as what comes next, and I definitely prefer the transformed version, which is why that's the one that I've built. But the untransformed one is also really fucking slick looking, and it gets you hyped up, and then you're already like, this thing's pretty cool, and then it transforms, lose my mind.
Yeah, and I think it's cool too. Like, I mean, even Transform too, where obviously it's a little bit more developed as a design, but like consider like the context of like when this this design, like, hit the shelves, right? And stuff. Yeah, like this is after, like, or this is like kind of during a little bit of like Double O, which was a little bit of a scale back from like Seed, but like, I mean, like those were like the things where you just have like these like kind of, in a lot of cases, over designed suits, massive backpacks and whatnot, and like, yes, like the full armor unicorn is a little bit, upscaled and stuff like that. But it's interesting, just kind of like how scaled down a lot of these. I mean, yeah, like Awakening the Trailblazer, like that was like literally like a contemporary of the Unicorn OVA. And you can just compare those Gundams to like the Unicorn, and it's night and day in terms of the aesthetic that they're going for.
100%. So I guess, I don't know. Let's get back to our aforementioned quip on 9/11, right? So I think we've already covered. We have this themes and subtext section of the outline. I think we've already talked about the treasure hunt plotline with Banner in the middle of two factions. Optimism in the face of despair and collapse. I think we addressed that pretty well, right? But I think we mentioned this earlier, and I think it's good we get back to this again, right? Which is what Peter Dale Scott would refer to as deep politics. Comes up a lot in Universal Century, and it's the big backdrop of this series itself, right? So we can kind of get into one of the writers of this series, Harutoshi Fukui. He's been accused of being like a Japanese nationalist, but for sure, like, he gets called like the Tom Clancy of Japan sometimes for this, like,
that's a crazy ass title.
It's really crazy,
Yeah.
right? Because like he had this, like, he wrote this like script for a movie once, which was like Japan is fighting to get its military back so it can like fight China or something. I don't know, something like that. And some of those like instincts pop back up in like the novelization of Unicorn. So the scene in the OVA and TV adaptation of the big red mobile armor destroying the Federation base in Dakar was verbatim supposed to be like a 9/11 allegory.
Well,
Like,
that whole arc is like radically rewritten. Like Fukui was to be clear, he was like the light novel author.
Okay.
Right. So he I think he was involved with the OVA as well, but like, so he's the originator of a lot of these things. But the whole arc on Earth is different. Like the Shamblo and the mobile armor and the Garvey family, like we just have Loni in the show, and she's kind of more of your traditional, like, Xeon soldier, like her parents were killed, she hates the Federation, blah, blah, blah. She had a whole family in the light novel that was still alive, including her dad, who was a Islamic terrorist.
Yeah. No, and basically, like, it was like a throwaway thing, right? Where it's like, the Xeon is using Islamic terror to further its goals. They kind of touch on like Islamic.
This
North
was
African
more so
rebels.
because he was like spearheading this, so it was more so like a jihadist is using Xeon to achieve his goals. So yeah, and like they brought him back in one of the manga adaptations too. I think he was a little toned down. Well, it's kind of. His appearance certainly wasn't toned down, but like they toned down a little bit of that. But like it was, he's like raging war against the Federation because it's like the white man's government, and
they were trying to pick up that thread in like Double Zeta. Remember, where like
you had like the
North
blue
African
team, and
exactly.
So like that's kind of a lingering thread of that, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad allegory, but like here it was a little over the top. You do have a scene where the Shamblo takes down a pair of towers in the light novel. Maybe you might call them twins, in fact. But, so like it was kind of heavy-handed. I see why the OVA opted to just scrap that and just keep the mobile armor and the girl and just move on from there.
I will say, I don't know if it was my translation or if it's Crunchyroll's translation that did this, but Full Frontal, even in the OVA, makes a reference to the Mahdi for some reason when he talks to Loni Garvey.
Oh, it's her dad.
Okay, so it's supposed to be the Mahdi, but
Mahdi Garvey is
okay. Thank God, because I thought he was talking about like Islamic eschatology and the apocalypse. That really got me scared.
Well, I mean,
that got me scared.
Names have a purpose, right?
They do, right?
That's probably why that was his name.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, like Mahdi Garvey was her dad's.
A second RX-0 Gundam has hit the towers.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't believe that there's real 9/11s in this one.
I'm gonna say it. ECOWAS did 9/11.
You're right to say it, and you should.
ECOWAS was behind the Kennedy assassination too.
Zaku
no one else was
can't melt steel beams.
Zaku fuel can't. I thought it was Minovsky particles. What is it doing? They could have used a heat sword or a heat hawk for crying out loud.
Hey, those heat hawks are pretty useless in the original show, to be fair.
I still can't believe in this series they had like somebody pull out a heat sword against the Bioland. Like that was funny. That was really funny.
Oh, and it wasn't even his too. It was like one of the Zizulus, and it like just grabbed the sword from one of the older things and just charged at him while the other guy ran away.
Amazing.
Yeah, the choreography on like a lot of those fights were really cool, especially like the ones that are like just the big battlefields, like the attack on Torrington, the attack on Palau as well. And there's a few others as well that are just like it's really cool just seeing like how they put together a lot of those fights. And the one in Laplace too, that was also another major highlight.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, I think definitely the series has a mature political conception in what is like, an ostensible like science fiction work, right? Like it has a very mature idea of what would an organization like the Earth Federation get up to in its spare time. And it builds up to like the same kind of pessimistic view of politics that Tomino had, right? Which is that the Federation, despite having all this power, is always getting up to dumb shit rather than leveraging its power to something good, And then having Zeon, try to cut backroom deals. That was the plot of Char's counterattack. And to have these conflicts and interpersonal struggles of the characters play out in that framework. It's brilliant, and it makes for rewarding combat scenes for the viewer. I don't think it rewarding for anyone involved in them, but it makes the war scenes in Gundam so much more emotionally resonant, right? It's like we're seeing people like driven to their lowest points by really immiserating political decision making that's somewhat reminiscent of the world we live in, you know? Not entirely, but somewhat.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Okay.
I think there's a lot that Unicorn has to say about society, really. This sounds a little silly to say, but like it really is like this one is really driving that point home more than some of the other series. Where
Yeah,
it's like, hey, listen, we gotta think about inequality. We gotta think about this.
yeah, because usually like the Tomino ones, I mean, some of it's like they have like a little bit of a pessimistic tone where it's just like, yeah, this is just how it is. Like it sucks, whatever. But some of them as well, like it's like they're not like. And I think I did actually watch the video that Adi had put as a link here for the politics of the ideology of the Earth Federation. Mostly just kind of like to recap some of the stuff that I was thinking, but like in most of like Tomino's works, like the Federation is like not like it's just like they're there. There's some bad people there, but it's they're the good guys. That's who all the good guys fight for. So they're not that bad. Really like Double Zeta is kind of the point where it's like, okay, like this place is like maybe kind of fucked up where they're you literally have like, hey, yeah, let's let Haman drop a colony on the Earth, like help depopulate things. That's a great idea. And then like Char's counterattack, you just kind of get like a Federation that's just brain dead, right? Like that's kind of like cutting a backroom deal, like believing that would like resolve the conflict wholeheartedly, and like they make it very clear that everyone responsible for it, they don't have ulterior motives. They're just like, oh no, this is going to work, it's fine. Giving him a massive asteroid after he just dropped a massive asteroid on the Earth, what's the worst that could happen?
Bye Tibet.
This is I'm not misremembering this, I hope, but this is the series where I believe it's Full Frontal makes the point about Xeon losing the battle of time.
Yeah.
That's something that like that has actually like affected my personal perception of politics deeply.
Go on.
Because like I had never really seen that point articulated like that before, but that is a like relatively deep historical truth. And now, of course, all historical truths have lots of exceptions, so don't take it as like an absolute or anything.
Now.
But it did. This did really speak to me because I find that there's a lot of truth to that concept of if you are in the position of trying to change the status quo, then time is not on your side. In a lot of different situations, and that I don't know. That's just something that has like resonated with me really deeply
arching towards justice.
Show.
And
what'd you say?
I was like, but the moral arc of history is slowly going towards justice. Like, what do you mean we're running out of time?
I mean, it arcs that way.
Ah, yes, the end of history. I'm sorry.
Man, somebody show Francis Fukuyama Gundam Unicorn. He gonna change the thesis real quick.
The end of post history.
The end of post history, right? I mean,
I
think. Oh, go ahead.
And I just think in general, also, just when you are the person who has a claim to prove. I mean, we could even apply this to. I'm not just pulling this all together right in this moment. I actually already had this thought separate of this podcast. You could apply this to the Young Thug trial, right?
I knew it was coming up.
The fact that the trial is going on for so long is in Young Thug's favor, just as a reality, because it is the state that must prove this thing. They have to like create this proof of this thing, and that like because like it is their conjecture that must be proved, time is against them, and the fact that the trial is going to run so long, people are going to get increasingly bored and start to feel like this is just like a dog and pony show. Even if it is true, I'm not saying it is for Young Thug. Um, uh, so I actually think about this concept all the time of like who has something to prove in a situation and time being against them, because if you're trying to change people's minds about something or like basically prove that something is true or real, then time is against you. The longer it takes you to prove something that you're claiming is real, the less people tend to believe in it. There are important exceptions to this, such as religion.
Yeah, I mean, I think I never really made that analogy before, to be honest. I think I think it's totally valid. It makes a lot of sense because, I mean, like the reference to time was like a very literal sense that like they literally had like to mark your calendars, you lose your independence on your political independence on this date in universe. But you're like, I think you're right that is something that like is resonant beyond just like this very specific context that in
well, I mean, Full Frontal makes it clear it's not just the literal date on the calendar, although of course it did exist. It was the philosophical concept of like, the people got tired of waiting to see what this new thing was that was supposed to be so great but kept not appearing.
And yeah, it's that rush against time that motivates his villainy in a real way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's reminiscent of the world we live in, where it's like the struggles we're up against. I mean, for crying out loud, this would be like a generational project, even with the best minds that work on it. So,
yeah,
Gundam is one of those useful series to me, at least, right? Like, I don't know if there's a word for this phenomenon where, like, whether or not it was the intent of the artistic work to give you this impression, you looking at it from your standpoint and then interacting with it can, like, give you a realization about something you were already thinking about. Is that standpoint theory? I don't know if that's the term for it. But like Gundam has been somehow, because of its grounded politics, remains useful for some of this. And I think like on a similar vein, although not as profound as Kennedy's realization, I think like Tomino's, like steely-eyed realism about politics and nation states, even though it's like highly fictionalized, have been like kind of useful, but it's the pessimism that he has that I also face and deal with, right? And I think what this series did is like it kind of, as part of its storytelling structure, but also like its thematic message, is that you can be incredibly realistic and steely-eyed about political institutions or political systems being corrupt or incompatible with certain principles, but not like become solipsistic or nihilistic in the process. And that I think is something I needed to hear when I watched this series for the first time, because I was really skeptical and really like in a pessimistic mood about everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like it's one of those things where, I mean, tying this back to like real world politics and just, life in general, right? Is that, just taking a pure facts and logic approach, there's no point being nihilistic or endlessly pessimistic because you have no way to know it's going to go that badly. Yep. Why not be optimistic if not just for the placebo effect?
At
least and I mean, like the nihilism and like the nihilism here is portrayed a little bit more in like kind of a spiritual sense of like, sense that, like, new types are able to, kind of transcend time, and he's literally seen the end of it where there's just nothing. But it's like that does feel just so like existential, and like I guess because like he's had that experience of like, well, like it's not existential to him because it's like just reality, right? Like it's for him that was yesterday or whenever he had this particular revelation. So it's a little different in that regard, but it does kind of raise like you can see where that nihilism roots in like just sort of like this giving up on like having a meaningful political ideology, right? It's just like, let's just settle for this like neoliberal Zionic project. Like that's against like everything that like this cause is fought for in the past. But yeah, fuck it. At least it's a W in the books.
And I think, I personally believe that you can't really affect change through nihilism, and you have to be optimistic to affect change in general. At least positive change, negative change, we'll just ignore that for the moment. And
if you want to enact negative change, what's the roadmap now?
I believe they call that a manifesto. So if you want to enact positive change, I think you need a certain degree of optimism, and I think that this show does illustrate that kind of thinking in a way that is compelling to me. Was compelling when I watched it, and I think has been compelling to other people that I've shown it to. Because ultimately, like, Full Frontal accomplishes nothing at all, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he necessarily wanted to either at that point, but
it's like all his dreams really come to nothing. Like, their final battle is way out in space, away from everybody. Like,
I mean, I kind of question because I know some people are like, "Oh man, like they time traveled in this show. This show really jumped the shark." But I'm not sure if they literally because it's like I don't did Riddy just see nothing in any of that, right? Like, because he's exactly where they left him before they went on this supposed journey. I always thought that was more of this metaphysical thing. I didn't think they literally
Yeah, I just saw that as Full Frontal doing the psychic vision stuff more so than anything. So me and Josh were talking about this while you were out making your tea, right? And I think it's worth maybe repeating this bit, right? Where it's there's a key line when Full Frontal meets Banagher for the first time and literally says, "I'm just a vessel for other people's hopes and dreams, nothing else." So he's from the jump, purely nihilistic and solipsistic in that deep existential way where he doesn't even seem to believe in free will or that his interests are anything worth pursuing. If anything, he's probably acting on the directives that are most amenable to certain factions in Neo Zeon. But
well, and that vessel line comes up a few more times too.
Several times.
He offers Banagher that opportunity too. Is you are also a vessel in some ways of all of these conflicting wills as well that you've interacted with. And then even for the final battle, right? He's two Gundams oppose me, the vessel of humanity. These are supposed to be the hope of humanity, yet this isn't compatible.
Yeah, it's more one is the collective sorrow and one is the collective hope. Who deserves to win in such a... I'm sorry if that language comes off as religious or needlessly woo-woo, but that's thematically what they're going with,
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I agree.
Definitely, I think what can be said about Gundam Unicorn that we haven't said already? It's brilliant. I think we can come back to it, but when we had you on for the Char's Counterattack episode, Kennedy, we presented you with a very spicy Tomino interview. We felt it would be time to bring you back for yet another spicy Tomino interview.
Oh, shit.
Would you like to see what the man himself was getting up to?
I'm so ready.
Okay. So I got the major highlights of the interview in the outline. I'm going to pull up the interview just so you can see it. A lot of it is pretty tame up until certain points. So
yeah, so this is what was the context? Was this the DVD release for Victory?
I want the context for this interview.
I think it's a bonus feature for the Blu-ray for Victory Gundam, right?
Okay, so this is after he's over his depression of telling people literally not to buy the series. Literally when it first came out on box set, he was like, "Don't buy it."
And this is also well after he's done Geno Reconquista. So he even mentions in this interview that by doing Geno Reconquista, I was able to get over all the regrets I had doing V Gundam. And Josh, I know me and you were talking offline about this one point, all the weird motorcycle and wheel designs in Victory Gundam.
Yes.
So I did read the interview too, and I think you mentioned that in V Gundam there hits a point where like everything is motorcycle reason.
Yeah, like all
And
the Zanskar Empire, just like 90% of their
them.
mobile suits are just motorcycles or wheels.
And again, like I think if they were consciously going for this, no, you don't understand. Motor vehicles are inherently fascist. Like storytelling theme, I'd love to see that. But the way Tomino sets it up is like it was one of those pressures from corporate or from the studio that he felt pressured to go along with, and then he literally animated all this frame by frame and was disgusted by it but still put up with it. And then he even mentions like, I don't get it because I thought that anime as a medium could accommodate such ridiculous things, but I didn't like it. And then when I saw films with CGI like the event, they don't do any of this shit. All the design is like, contiguous with like the art style for the movies. So it pissed me the fuck off. Like those were his words. Those were his words. So he was just like, I wish I didn't like listen to the studio when I did that stuff. I haven't seen V Gundam yet, so I'm not gonna judge.
I have,
but I haven't seen it actually.
It's a trip. It's a trip.
It's focused on like space colonies invading a segment of Eastern Europe, as I understand it, right? In like really late UC.
Yeah, it's UC 150. So about 60 years after this, the colonies of Side 2 have formed the Zanskar Empire, which there's some tie-in with like Jupiter involved with that. A very recent manga retconned one of the main villains, the one from Jupiter, as like being a big admirer of Shirako. So, you kind of have a little bit more tie-ins now to like the early UC stuff as well. But that's kind of the main thing there. And it's Victory Gundam had at the time the youngest protagonist in the series, who some speculate is Char's descendant, because his mom has Nanai's last name and looks just like Nanai. And wouldn't it be cool if Char's like great grandson was like a Gundam pilot, I guess? So that's, some of the context of Victory as a whole.
Nanai mentioned once again.
Does Nanai's supposed daughter serve cunt? Because if not,
well, I mean, she gave birth to a kid and gets her head decapitated later. So, I mean,
that's kind of a way of, I don't know. Yeah, sure.
I mean, if you give birth to the protagonist, that's a feather in your cap. I'd say that. But
speaking of serving cunt, we've got
oh boy, so
why you've opted to share this interview.
Okay, so do I bring back the Tomino voice?
Sure, you should bring a picture up of Katagina Loose first.
Okay, so let's bring up the character. Okay, so Katagina Loose.
Yeah, because I've never seen V Gundam.
So this is the antagonist, and you can already see based on the figures what we're dealing with here.
Okay.
This is official art. This is official art.
No, that's straight from the show. That's
like
the second to last. That's like the ending bumper of the second to last episode.
But the fact that this is just so clearly Lady Char to the point where she's like maybe giving like a almost like trans vibe in a way, like Tomino, you got some splaining to do. All right,
he will explain. He's about to explain.
No, but well, okay. Let me see what he does explain, because I want to know, like, how much do you want to fuck Char? What's the deal there?
I mean, he literally designed a character based off like what he felt he would want to fuck, and now like we've got, as you said, a very like strong Char design language translated to the female form.
She is extremely char-coded.
It's char-coded, but there's going to be some surprising developments. I'll walk you through.
Okay, I'm ready for surprising developments.
All right.
I like the sounds of that.
All right, I'm going to bring back Tomino voice for this one. So, the interviewer, nonetheless, I had no idea you were so fond of Katagina. Really? I like the name Katagina Loose, too. The reason it suddenly occurred to me to bring that up is because just 1 hour ago, I remember the source of the name Katagina. there was a source. So he goes on and talks about how he got inspired by it through an Eastern European literature collection, and he got the name from a book there. The story I read there was about Jewish people in the Holocaust during World War II. Cold drop. As I was reading it, I thought about creating Katagina as a character who sees herself as the perpetrator, for whom fighting as a combatant is nothing but killing something inside herself. For a while, I completely forgot about it, but a few years ago, I happened to see that book of Eastern European literature on a bookshelf and recalled, oh, that's right. So the character of Katagina came from Eastern European literature then. It's like the anecdote about how the name of the protagonist Camille in Zeta Gundam came from the female sculptor Camille Claudel. They're nothing alike. I was trying to do something more impactful with Katagina. So when it comes to her voluptuousness, that's derived from the sturdy attributes within her Jewish heritage. Cold drop. Cold fucking drop.
I like how it's like the Holocaust has to be in there too, right? Where so it's just like the Holocaust is just like, man, like Hitler took out some great pairs.
So just out of curiosity, do they mention she's Jewish at any point in V Gundam?
No.
That's what I thought. Interview.
All of the references to, because there was another one, I think. I want to say it was Jamatov in Zeta was supposed to be like a Zionist whose objective was to like kick like bad people off Earth to just give the Jews Earth.
For real?
Like that was that. Yeah, it was like a scrapped early idea that he had.
Also, Double O Gundam is Jewish conspiracy Gundam, and we don't
like
talk
space
about this
lasers,
enough.
literally.
Yeah, there is a literal space laser in that too. Yeah,
I don't think it. I'm gonna bring up.
I'm not even that sensitive to this stuff in a lot of ways because I was only partially raised around the heritage and the faith in a weird mixed faith household where my mom's an anti-Semite, and I was, as soon as I started watching Double O Gundam, I got a little ways in. I was like, "What the fuck is this Jewish conspiracy?"
So I'm gonna botch the retelling of this event. I don't know when this happened. I don't know if it was the British who did this or if it was like Imperial Russia that did this. But at some point, that fraudulent document, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, was presented to like the Imperial Japanese.
okay.
And they were like, "Damn, that's crazy. We got to consult them on this because we're trying to take over the world too." That was like a literal response. Was like, "Yo, they're already ahead of the game on us. Shit, we got to respect the hustle."
Yeah.
It's just, it's crazy.
Reject Zionism, Gundam. Watch Seed instead.
Yeah. But yeah, as the like the stuff I said that John Hove, he didn't end up doing that, but like that was like the original backstory, and it might explain why he has like nothing going for him in Zeta. It's just like the leader of the Titans who's there to die.
Oh my god! So then Tomino gets on, and like this is the most crazy part. This is the craziest part of the interview.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna start with the first sentence because like it starts tame, then it gets crazy out of nowhere. So Eastern European literature. This is Tomino speaking. I'm not gonna do the voice. Eastern European literature has a unique atmosphere.
What do you mean you're not gonna do the voice?
Eastern European literature has a unique atmosphere, but I think that kind of introverted, refractive feeling is something Japanese people don't understand at all. So it's hard to get used to it. They have a history of being occupied over and over again without acknowledging it, even though they're enduring it every day as they live their lives. And then if you're Jewish, you're in an even more complicated social position. When I went to Prague to record the V Gundam soundtrack, I wandered out as far as Auschwitz, cold drop. This was before it became a World Heritage Site, so it wasn't as well maintained as it is now. I couldn't bring myself to look at the incinerator, so I was just standing at the surrounding scenery while I basked in the sun by a building at the entrance. The women walking by the outside of the site were cheerful with sturdy, healthy physiques. I had the strange sensation that these women, the anxieties in Eastern European literature, and the Holocaust that once took place were all overlapping without overlapping. But that experience gave me the conviction that Katajina's direction wasn't a mistake.
Dude, what the fuck is going on right now?
I'm telling you, not even God could prepare me for this Tomino interview.
Yeah, I mean,
Tomino is so far out of pocket right now.
well, and the best part is like none of this is reflected in her character. Like, I mean, she
And
has
Tomino
like, a
puts
character
way too
arc,
much
yeah,
thought. He puts way
it's
too
like
much fucking.
into stuff that like he doesn't convey to the audience outside of these interviews. So it's just like, I mean, I guess it's like when
Tomino
you're
is like the Chris Nolan of anime.
No. You know who else is like this? Hirohiko Araki, the author of JoJo's. That dude also just be traveling places and then's like,
Yeah, but
you know what, I need
JoJo's
to-
be full of little references. to this
Exactly.
shit. Like,
Yeah.
exactly.
Gundam Tomino be like, actually, I've been reading a lot of classic Italian literature, but then he doesn't directly reference it whatsoever.
Right.
like, you know, I named
In Gundam, it's like there will be like a guy just reading the book that Araki's currently obsessed with, like, and it's like that's the next stand user, you know?
right, yeah, like,
right.
yeah. There's definitely a bit of a difference.
It's again we're back to square one where we are at with Char's counterattack, where just this insane amount of thought put into like Nanai, who's like a second tier character in the plot of that movie, right?
No,
and he's
I'm
over
just
here. Go ahead.
Keep going, but finish your thought
Well,
first.
I was just gonna say it's like he's over here talking about like, bro, she's got a fat coochie. And Char would be an idiot if he wasn't with her, you know, like just going out of his way to spell that out to us, the viewer. And again, it's like at no point is it even implied nor necessary to know, you know. But that's the level of thought he put in.
No, there's a throwaway line that he said that she does make me very happy in bed.
Oh God, there is that. He's that throwaway line. That is true.
Oh fuck, what was I gonna say? Shit. No, I do. I really want to defend this. Tomino is the Christopher Nolan of anime, because Christopher Nolan gave this interview recently where he was like, you know, there's still a lot of little secrets people haven't discovered about Oppenheimer. And I was just like, shut the fuck up.
I mean, that is kind of the thing we were referencing when we did our Oppenheimer interview, if you remember, Josh, where it's like, you know, Nolan like went out of his way to like back up the idea that like Gene Tadlock was murdered by the CIA, you know, or not the OSS in this case.
And
right?
then you've got like, I mean, I haven't watched Napoleon yet, but then you've got, you know, Ridley Scott on the other hand, who's like, you know, fuck you, historians.
Exactly. Oh God!
I want
to
see that movie so bad because apparently it just completely leans into Napoleon being a wimpy little incel who's just destroying the world because women don't like him, and I just think that sounds fucking awesome.
Well, that's the thing, right? Is like, so I watched this like last week with my partner, and like we had so much fun with this one. One because like the historical scale and like the epics, like shit, the paintings brought to life, they do that part well. But there's a lot of like unintentional comedy, and a lot of people are reacting poorly to it. But the thing is like my only reason for why I know a whole scaring level amount of Napoleonic history is I'm a fan of this show called Age of Napoleon. It's a great podcast. I think people should check it out just because it's a fun one to listen to. But basically, the host like does an amazing amount of like research on the subject and lays out a bunch of historical opinions about Napoleon. And basically, the truth on Napoleon is lost because every account of him is either like he was the best guy ever. He invented liberalism. He brought the Napoleonic Code all across Europe.
The first education system.
He was the first education system, for crying out loud. Like it's either like hagiography or it's like Napoleon farted in every room he went into, and I fucking hate him. So it's like that is literally the historical record on Napoleon. So like the parts that make sense, you know, in the podcast, the host is basically saying like, yeah, Napoleon was weird around women. He was really weird with his like wife Josephine. So like the way the dynamic played out to me in the movie, darkly funny, but also like the historical record doesn't indicate one way or another. And from what little we know, he was weird with women anyways. So like, why is this bothering people? Or then the thing about like, Napoleon complexes, right? That's an amalgamation of stereotypes about Napoleon. Like he was too short, he was too arrogant, he was a micromanager. And these are true to, I mean, the short one is not really, but like his arrogance is a repeat aspect that comes up in his correspondence and correspondence about him. I'd say the best record of Napoleonic primary sources is the letters that he wrote to people and letters people wrote about him to other people. So in those letters, people bring up his character. People talk about like, yeah, he's this, in the same people who would call him heroic one day would also talk about what a pain in the ass he is to work with. So for him to like have tantrums on screen, it's not too far from like the historical record that we have, on top of like the swinging pendulum of opinion around him historically and at present. So if he has this reputation as this like, famous scoundrel of history, and a movie depicts him as a scoundrel, why is everyone getting upset? I thought you hated this guy.
Well, yeah, to be fair, a lot of that controversy like was coming out even before the movie came out, just from his like attitude towards like, as a director, his attitude towards like the historical record and whatnot.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
There's more historically accurate retellings. I think like there's a 1926 film that's like a 5-hour 6-act like story of like Napoleon's life. That's a lot more sympathetic to him, but also is
one of those.
It's one of those, but it's also
Yeah.
allegedly more like historically accurate because it covers a wider berth of time, so you can get into more people. There's also like a shorter one, but was really influential, Waterloo, which was like an Italian Soviet film project that was really well, but it like only covers his last battle, So there's like at least 50 films made about Napoleon, and this is just like the newest entry. For what it's worth, I thought it was entertaining.
And for what it's worth, Adi, it's not just you. I've heard this from like 2 other people now about it being a hilarious anti-incel type of movie. And I'm into that.
Right. It's like the kind of thing where, I mean, now we're just going to get meta here for a second, right? But it's like when you adapt a story to film, the choices you make are the adaptation. And how you justify those choices, to me, is like an artistic style and how you prove the merit of your art, right? And I think, Ridley Scott, being the kind of guy he is, he's hot, he's like, this hard-ass guy who doesn't care about historical accuracy, but cares about depicting like high drama and spectacle. That's what he prioritized in his film. And that's what comes out brilliantly on screen. High drama and spectacle. If you came in here expecting to learn Napoleonic history, joke's on you.
I think we're veering into the next episode.
Yeah. That is our next film episode.
What else did Tomino say?
In the rest of this interview, he gets back to being tame.
Okay, that I was worried there might be something even more out of pocket coming.
No, this is actually like the one part I will mention that's kind of humanizing, right? Is like so the interviewer asked him a question. This is a naive question, but might it be possible to make a new translation of V Gundam as was done with Zeta Gundam? This is the first time anyone's ever said that to me. It's hard to come up with a reflexive response when you're asked.
Wait. I like the idea of New York, like a New Yorker Tomino.
Well, this is the first time anybody's ever said that to me. It's quite hard to come up with a reflexive response when you ask so suddenly. If I use the structure I previously created, then yes, it's possible. I think the framework of the story is fine. But given my regrets about the visuals, I'd have to change them completely. I don't think it's something that would be easy to revive. Anyways, I don't feel like doing it. In the end, it's just more Gundam, right? I don't have time for things like that. If I wasted my times on such things, I'd be good as dead.
That was the perfect voice for that, actually.
Okay, so the interview goes on. This is the final question in the interview. So looking at it like that, I can see that the themes of war and ethnicity you had at the time of V Gundam were passed on to Turn A Gundam and G Rico. That's right. Otherwise, I'd never have started reading Hana or Rent. Oh, God. But that kind of relationship between works is just a matter of the creator's schedule. And I don't think the creator should be talking about that unless G Rico gets more recognition. Classic Tomino. Looking back over the past 20 years, though, I'm honestly glad that it didn't end with V Gundam that I made so over seriously, but got as far as G Rico, which talks with the outrageous realism of 800 lies about what humanity should be. I believe those of us who earn a living from Gundam have a duty to move forward like that, even if it's just a little bit. Which rings true to what Unicorn ends up being, you know?
Yeah. And unfortunately, we have yet to make an earning from Gundam, so we're not ready to move on.
Nope. So yeah, that's our findings from the V Gundam box set interview with Tomino. And I guess what can be said about that, as well as Gundam Unicorn in general, right? Where it's like a severe amount of thought at a variety of levels being put into what is ostensibly, a mecha sci-fi anime. It would be cartoonish, to think about like this kind of show would have such deep commentary and insight on concepts of like, politics, war and peace, human potential, nihilism and optimism.
9/11.
9/11,
Yeah.
literally, right?
When you said
all these-
nihilism, I thought you were going to say...
Well, it led us there.
I guess. I mean, I feel like we've really like run the gauntlet on like good things we can say about this series, but I think like there's a reason why we keep coming back to talk about Gundam on this podcast, and also like why it's holding up as evergreen to me is just because like it captures a lot of these ideas pretty well, while also serving its function as like sci-fi entertainment. And to me stands out as like a top 5 example of where it shines in doing that. So
Yeah. Well, thanks for throwing this one together. This is just such a great series to get to talk about.
For sure.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, and we recommend you check it out. Whether you're new to Gundam or whether you're willing to sit through the entire UC timeline to get to it, I think both experiences are rewarding.
For sure.
All right. So with all that being said,
one of them is more rewarding. I'm not telling which one.
With all that being said, I guess I don't know. Any other closing thoughts before we start wrapping this up?
Nah, this shit slaps. I think that's about all. I think that's about all there is to say.
Yeah, hopefully we can find some more Tomino interviews to share as well.
Yeah, that was fun. I think if I just want to say anything about Unicorn that I haven't said enough already, it's just, God, it's so pretty. It's so pretty. Go watch it because it's pretty.
Even so, go watch it. All right. Kennedy, thanks for joining us for this episode. Is there anything you'd like to plug?
No.
All right, solid. Well, I'll have the links to all our social media in the description below. As well as, I don't know, anything else we gotta put? I don't think so. Thanks for tuning into this one, dear listener. We'll see you in the next time. Take care. Bye-bye.